Welcome everyone to the third in our series called Exploring Social Justice. This series has featured so far and will be featuring fascinating speakers, telling stories of their personal and profound experiences with injustice, and then also love and forgiveness in action around the world. It's co-sponsored by the AU Library and the K Spiritual Center, and it's brought to you through a grant from the Fetzer Institute, an organization which is dedicated to fostering awareness of the power of love and forgiveness in the emerging global community. So the library and K make great partners. Both are dedicated to great questions and to learning and to exploration. And with that, I'd like to welcome University Chaplain, who just sat down, Joe Eldridge, who will introduce our speaker today.
Well, I can say that you are in for a treat with both the speaker and the film. Now, I can say this because I'm what's called the university chaplain. I occupy this round building with a flame on the roof called the K Spiritual Life Center. How many have been in that building? Very good. Outside of my office is a poster. And on that poster, right outside the door, it's a Desmond Tutu. And it says, messages. That's not probably our speaker probably has not had an introduction like this. It says, messages from the desk of God are told through the stories of our fellow human beings. We but have to listen. And nobody tells stories of our fellow human beings better than our speaker and filmmaker. Andrea Kalin. She said I could go either way. We're going to go with Kalin. Is an award-winning producer, documentarian. If you count up the awards, I think it's like 75. She's won 75 awards. That's hard to compete with. This story is the one we're going to see is a very haunting portrayal of the destruction and the tragedy in Syria. And it's called Red Lines, and I feel very privileged that we're gonna be able to see it. And of course, I think we were all touched by the story of Kayla Mueller, this young woman who we learned last week had been executed by ISIL or ISIS. And that once again dramatically helped to keep that in our focus, the tragedy that has been unfolding in Syria. There's something in her resume that kind of captures, I think, what she is about and what she does through these documentaries. Well, let me first say that she has. Among the awards are 3 Primetime Emmys and Golden Globe and WGA nominations. And Spark Media, which she founded in 1989, correct, is the vehicle through which she's able to bring this to our attention, to the public's attention, these stories, these issues. She says, Spark Media is truly a spark as it utilizes visual narratives to increase awareness, create connections, and empower audiences to become more engaged and committed to make a difference in the world in which we live. Andrea?
That was quite the intimidating introduction. I've got to live up to it. I'm really glad to be here. I was concerned about it because my flight was actually canceled, and I came through Atlanta last night at like 1 o'clock in the morning to a house that had no heat. So I am very happy to be here and very warm, which feels good. I'm also happy to be back. I'm curious with the students here if any of you are in the School of Justice. No students from the School of Justice. Okay, well, when I was here many years ago, I was in the School of Justice. I was studying criminal justice. And I would have been sitting here, too, looking out at perhaps one of the movies that they brought into the school at the time and listening to one of the speakers. Specifically, I was very enthralled with a guy by the name of Jerome Miller, who was a visionary that was determined to deinstitutionalize juvenile facilities. And I would have never imagined sitting in that chair that couple years up, more than I want to remember, that I'd be standing here at a forum on social justice and talking to you about my experience in Syria and also the film that I made, Red Lines. But my journey from criminology major to indie filmmaker, I always quote James Baldwin, who talks about that you have to go the way your blood beats. You have to pursue your own path and what that passion is. And for me, that passion led me to independent filmmaking, led me to stories that I felt that I could use a media megaphone to amplify, voices that I could provide a platform for, and stories that transcend barriers. That was very important to me, that when we started Spark, that those stories would be stories that wouldn't just entertain, but also would educate and would enrage. We wanted to engage people, but we wanted to also enrage, get people motivated to do something about what they've just witnessed. Because part of being a filmmaker and the honor, the privilege of filmmaking, I see is being behind that camera and recording stories and watching decisions and issues as they fold right before your eyes. But even with that sacred recording, you also have the responsibility, because often you may be the person that they're using as a conduit and are entrusting with their story. And this is how the journey with the piece Red Lines began. I did not make this film with a specific political perspective in mind. I did not come to it with a specific ideology. I went on a journey, and on that journey, my camera was going to be the witness. And what I felt was important is I wanted to give voice to the activists on the ground and the people I was meeting, whether it was the fearlessness of the refugees or the stubborn insistence of the activists to stand up to injustice, regardless of whether they were going to win this battle or not. They felt they had no other choice but to stand up and express through their activism that this status quo could not continue. It was a very difficult story to tell. This was not one that had an easy beginning, middle, and end. In fact, it's still ongoing. And that's the purgatory of telling a story that there isn't a kind of a Hollywood ending, but there is one of where I feel through this story, through awareness, that we can come together as a community. I know that when I witnessed really in the toughest of times and what I felt was the heat of war, we saw monstrous circumstances, and I really specifically used the word monstrous because that's what it was. It was just beyond what our heads could wrap around. And yet, even in these instances, there were these moments of just brilliant humanity that just kind of broke through all of the morass that we were observing and recording with our cameras. And it was those moments that I wanted to capture, because I felt that the story, the primary narrative of the conflict in Syria that was being broadcast here by the news or was available was not the story that I was witnessing on the ground. And I felt compelled to bring the human side of the conflict to the story that you're about to see. So I hope in the discussion that we have after the screening that you'll have lots of questions. If you don't, I didn't do my job, because I wanted to leave this ambiguous. There are no easy answers, and as the story continues to get more and more complicated, you'll see what I hope is how everything started to unfold. What I hope you get out of this is the context, and perhaps it will restore some empathy, ignite some compassion in all of you as it did in us in actually making this film. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. This is red lines. So are there any more lights we can turn off, or is that the emergency? Yes. Okay. It looks like it's hanging down his jacket. Let's do that later. Here. Like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that April 2011, I remember that I had very big party in my house, and the revolution was starting, because we didn't believe that it will be happen, that there will be a real revolution, because we know our dictator.
It was here. I was lobbying on behalf of the Libyans. And so when it happened, I was shocked because I didn't think the revolution would come to Syria. Everything, geopolitically flipped upside down. The regime was shown to be something much more horrible than we ever thought.
I was born in Homs, the capital of revolution. It's in the middle of Syria. When the revolution started, we were like, I remember this word between me and my father. He said, it's impossible to get our freedom like Egypt or Tunisia.
What would you consider was your first act as an activist?
Yeah, when we started to record the videos, it was like different feeling that we show the world about what's happening on the ground.
Syrian troops opened fire on protesters with live ammunition. The dramatic video shot earlier this month and uploaded to YouTube, one of the only ways information now is getting out.
The government's attempts to cut communications make it impossible to verify for certain what's going on inside Syria.
From the beginning of our work, we have different tansiqiyat on internet, on Facebook. So I have my group, she has her group, and we publish news from what's happening inside Syria. But we don't know each other because I used to have fake names. Zono. أنا كمان سمفورة شو
يصدق هذا الذي يحصل. الله كفر والله حرب نظامي. كنا نصور فيديو كنا بالقنص.
You see, at the end of the day, they're just all normal, everyday people that did not expect to do anything crazy, that did not expect to be revolutionaries.
هذا أول جوال نصور فيه المظاهرات. بعدين طورنا.
And then we but then they just were called to go and do what they had to do.
Some people called for the downfall of the regime. There are reports that the protests are spreading to Damascus and other parts of southern Syria.
We started this revolution to say that we want freedom and democracy. And how can we be free people if we don't establish free Syria? At about 2 o'clock a.m., the regime started to attack them and shoot them. Then we knew that this is serious and they were not playing.
The killing went on the following day as police opened fire on mourners at the funerals of those who died on Friday.
Did your father know you were going to more and more of these protests, and what was his response?
I always focus on these sentences because he all the time said, you are girls, if they catch you, wallah, they will rape you, they will kill you, they will punish you more than men. And then when I left, my father sent me with my brother to Turkey before they're going there. He just want me to go. And when he sent me, my life is totally changed. I met Muaz at that time, and we started to be like so effective more than before.
Let me see, can you, hold on with me 1 second. Call the general on your phone. I'm gonna have you on speaker. I'm gonna have the general on another phone on speaker. No, it's not. So I'm gonna translate between you guys. Nobody has the connections we have at this point, or even close. Look, this is the thing. You get this signed, and I'll make sure you have like lunch, breakfast, and dinner with the general for a week.
After we talked about John McCain's trip to Syria last week, a friend of mine who lives in Washington, D.C. emailed me and said, hey, I know one of the guys in that photo. Not the alleged kidnapping associate, but this guy. Turns out this man is the person who actually arranged the trip. His name is Muaz Mustafa. He has spent years working on Capitol Hill. He's now executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, an advocacy group.
We meet on a monthly basis with the National Security Council. We meet with Special Operations Command, Central Command, and SOCCENT, which is the interagency between Special Operations Command and Central Command. We have become a resource to the U.S. government. We implemented more than $1 million of their communications equipment. We regularly brief upon their request the Armed Services Committee in the House and the Senate and the Foreign Affairs Committees of both.
Are they surprised sometimes by the things you tell them in these meetings?
Absolutely, because when we say things in meetings, we're not just saying things, we're providing proof. We are getting information Razan gets from the ground and others, and we present it to them in real time. The title here is to show the Americans that they could do a lot more, right? So influencing the outcome without armed intervention. We use it. We use this with the Defense Intelligence Agency to the point where General Mike Flynn, a 3-star general, said nobody in our intelligence agencies has this information. It's from the multiple meetings with the armed groups, all of them. So we had to liberate Karmid, which was liberated.
That's it.
I mean, that's like fortunately and unfortunately, right? Like, okay, we're very happy that we're providing something they don't have. At the same time, really, it's up to us to provide this information to the United States government.
But how do you come to be an intermediary in this?
My father is Palestinian and my mother is Syrian, and I identify most when I think of Syria with kids that were my age. I left at about 12 years old, and so when I go back, I see those 12 years old kids. Huge jigsaw puzzle. $50,000
U.S. prices. I think a lot of the medicine has come from different doctors who have been donating from the community. That's how a lot of aid is going in right now, through these good but informal systems. Come on, stop throwing.
Have you ever listened to reggae, Ahmed? No, this is the day you listen to the song. Listen to the song.
Before the revolution, would you two have met? Would you two have worked together? Would you two have been friends?
No.
Tell me about that. Why?
No, because we come from different backgrounds completely. Yeah. Even if we were living both in Syria the whole time, we were from two different lives.
He is from Damascus, I'm from Homs. We are in different cities.
I'm poor, she's rich. I grew up in Syria very poor, with poor people in a poor neighborhood. I remember like when my dad built like a small window, which was like very small, but on the street level, and he used to carry me up and I could look at the people's feet. And so we really learned what really matters in life. You don't have to be wealthy or anything to be happy, but you have to have dignity to be happy. And you have to have freedom to be happy.
Yes, that's her. What? And then, oh, yeah.
شو بتعمل هيك؟ ايوه رزان هون اذا بتحب تسلم عليه.
كيفك جميل؟
أنا رزان الحمد لله على السلامة.
رتب لنا الموضوع مشان ندخل بعد بكره.
إن شاء الله. أشوف الطريق يعني هاي الفكرة.
يلا.
طيب أوكي
ماشي أوكي. يلا.
بصيبوا حالة حزن، كل مرة بروح فيها الحدود بيرجع، وكل مرة بدخل فيها وبيرجع بيطلع. حاصل الجيش. الناس معك.
هذا حيمكن.
تدخل البحر هيك شغلة قلبنا يعني، إنه كثير انبسط.
في شبه اللي حيتصل فيك يعني بجوز بعد ساعة ساعتين يقول لك انه هو من طرفي. هو جاي من السعودية هذا الشاب، بدي ابعته مع ابو يحيى على حمص، فبس انه استلم لي حط لي عندك بالبيت قبل ما انا اجي المساء، في امكانية؟
بأمرك أنا بأمرك.
كمان يأمر عليك سوري.
شو لنا حياتنا إذا ما اشتغلنا بفيلم بدك يعني.
الله يسلمك. نحن طيارتنا 8:30 يعني بنوصل شي 10:30، بنشوفك بالليل.
ماشي.
يلا باي.
يلا باي. باي.
عشان ما تعرف تحكي الموضوع.
السلام.
الله يسلمك يا رب. شو اخبارك انت؟ هذا
I've been in Aleppo today and I've seen our guys who liberate the area safe and secure, and they don't have pocket money to spend for their food. So I'm very angry.
This gentleman is showing a video of himself. He's a Free Syria Army commander. He was just walking in the street. No, he was just a civilian. I don't even know. We're walking in the street and I got hit. And I took them myself out of Homs. Strapped on his stomach. We put his stomach back inside. We had nothing. We have no medicine. So now we wrapped his stomach with actual bread bags. Look, that's bread bags. Because all of the city of Homs is under shell. We don't know when a missile comes.
The regime in Syria claims that they're not advocating civilians, that there is no armed conflict, that there is no war inside Syria, that they're basically just going after terrorist gangs.
Every civilian house on the street has been hit. We're talking about, it's a very kind of poor, popular neighborhood. The top floor of the building I'm in has been hit. In fact, totally destroyed. There are no military targets here. It's a complete and utter lie that they're only going after terrorists. The Syrian army is simply shelling the city of cold, starving civilians.
شهر تركض لا بهذا الركض كله هذا حشته انا شلته فاحسن يعني بده يفلت مني فشلته فدمه هون ضل هيك على وشه على رقبتي وعلى صدري هيك كل دمه هون وبعدين طلعني من هون بعد هيك واعد من هون ضل من الصبح للساعه 2 بالليل
اجوا على ظهري وشق لي الكنزه شال اوكي صار يسحب لحتى صرت على روس طبيعي حط الميل اتثبتت بلش ضرب من الرقبه يضرب للاجري بيتلذذ اذا سمع كلمه الله، هو بيتلذذ بالعذاب بصير يضرب زياده اذا سمع يا رب او هيك.
Taking medicines that we brought him to bring him into Homs. Each medical equipment he'll take in, and he's taking the son man with him that wants to come and fight for the revolution.
عندما ندفع حق خياري عندما يوصلوا للحكومة التركية من السعودية. نحن قاعد هلا زي هذا الشخص مرافعه هنا معسكر وخيم الضباط، وهذا الشاب اللي ذكر سنه قاعد معاه، الشاب صار بيوصلنا بالمكتب هذا وزير رئيس الوزراء جالس معي. والله يا حجي خذها نصيحه من اخ، اخرج عن موضوع التصليح وخذ الموضوع الاول اليتامى والارامل وموضوع العوائل. لانه ما راح يقدر ينصف حجي موضوع التصليح دائما بيحكي خط احمر. السلاح هذا اخي والله لا يوصف الصالح والصالح، والله سمشيته من ابي. ابو يحيى وهو يرمي قنبله. شركة سوبريور.
I used to work in a French company that sold makeup, and look where I was and where I am now. I was happy. Before the revolution, I was doing fine. I was much better off than after the revolution.
صدقكم الله دولة دير بالك على
ان شاء الله. السلام عليكم. I told him that I told him that if you're not hired in the office here and he doesn't open the office in his Sam's office, then I quit. So you're hired and you'll get a salary.
He said that suddenly.
Yeah,
let's open office.
Yeah, I'll be your boss.
Who will work with me?
You would be the head of the office. Whoever works with you will be all the activists that come and go every day.
Look.
You do whatever you want. It'll be your office.
Look. Okay. And when he told me that let's open office, like inside me, oh, he wants to control my work. No. But then he repeated, okay.
So you have an agenda. You do this, and then on your time, you do whatever the hell you want.
Decision.
What do you want to be called?
Argument and make.
What do you want to be called?
Me?
Your title. You have to have a title. We're going to give you business cards and stuff.
Were there any expectations before that initial meeting? Like, did you know how you were going to continue to work together? Or
No, not at all.
So no, we didn't know what we were doing. We knew she was an amazing activist on the ground, and I was working on political stuff here, and we were helping each other. Hello? A guy, yesterday I met him for like the first time in my life. He's left his family and his kids and going all the way to Homs, and he'll probably die. but I'm in no use to go to Homs. I can't do anything. I don't know how to fire a rifle. I don't know how to defend. I've never had military training. I don't know how to fight a war, and I don't have a gun. You know, they don't need men. They need men with guns. No one gives a fuck. No one understands, and they say bullshit. Al-Qaeda and this and that. I need to know what is the best thing, how I could help the most. أنا كل هدفي إنه فعل الأمريكان بدور إيجابي بدل ما يضيعوا مصاريهم على الفاضي وما يساعدوا بشيء. هذا كل هدفي. محل واحد قرية ولو 50 واحد عايش فيها بس مش أسهل من هيك بس مشان نبلش الشعب إنه ما بطل يجي ضد الأمريكان. في عندك أي منطقة هون حبوا تجربوا تجربة. If that works, even for a village of 2,000 people, then you can move on to another village until you have a whole area, a whole province under that rule. And then the U.S. can play a constructive role. This is our only hope. Otherwise, we're stuck in this chaos that we're in.
شو هذا؟ قول له شو هذا؟ تلفزيون؟
رأيناهم هون.
بالمدرسة؟
ايه حولوا
شو تسوي بيه هذا؟
هون نلعب فيهم لعب.
تلعبوا بيهم؟
الصبيان سمعوا انه صار فيها شيء للمستشفى ما والله ما بعطونا شيء.
جازان سوية من كل طرف. السلام عليكم. We operate in liberated areas because the UNHCR and the other UN organs don't operate in these areas.
المشفى الإيطالي بريف جسر الشهور الجنوبي الغربي هو تقريبا محل هذا بالضبط ولكن ريف دركول ريف او ناحيه دكور تفضل ناحيه دكور.
You know, people were terrified of, the hospital was supposed to be hidden somewhat because Assad would bomb it right away. Assad goes after bread factories, bakeries, hospitals, humanitarian workers before he goes after militants because he's fighting the Syrian people. He's not fighting any specific group.
فمكان الدرزي امور تقنيه طبعا وهذا طبعا يستحيل اصلاحه.
It's hard. You bring a tattered Italian hospital, you bring some aid that you collect out of a fundraiser in Washington or something like that. It's nothing.
Then the Italian said it was new. It deflates in 5 minutes.
It's indicative of how little people or the world is giving to help Syria. But it was better than nothing.
يعني انا عندي 6 اولاد، هذا عنده 10 اولاد، هذا عنده 7 اولاد. صرنا نحن هلا في عالم سيد على اسبوع وعالم يومين.
Those aircrafts are shelling and missiles.
الأطفال بالمدارس بيرة بلوم بيرة ماتوا 2 بالمدرسة
نحن بحجي باشا أيمن أيام بحجي باشا جايين نازحين إلى
لا في حفوضات للطفل، لا في أكل للكبير، لا للصغير، ما في شيء، لا حليب، ما في شيء أبدا.
فوق ال 300 شخص أطفال قاعدين أطفال أغلبا على الأراضي، شيء بيجنن. هلا ليكني أنا هنيك رح يطق قلبي.
هول الزحمة طلعنا فيه، مين بيطلع فينا هدول؟ مين بيطلع في الزحمة طلعنا فيهم؟
إذا بيقدر يدبر لنا هلا فرشات عدد 100 وحرامات عدد 100. Our support is individual support until now. So, and the needs every day, you have a lot of refugees become every day. So we need more, but we are individual people. Don't bus فرش.
هذا فرش
وحرامات.
حبل مثل هذا.
Where are the community, international community from those people? Where are they? I don't know.
With temperatures plummeting as winter settles in, international aid groups warn the humanitarian crisis will only get worse for the millions of displaced Syrians inside and outside the country. But you and I were talking earlier about this idea of the aid that's coming in. There's a lot of aid coming in from various countries, but is the aid to refugees necessarily coming in through the right channels so it's getting to the people in the most effective means possible?
It is very difficult to bring in that humanitarian aid, especially to these liberated areas where no UN bodies are operating. Most of the aid that comes from the international community goes through the United Nations and its organs, World Food Program, UNHCR, etc. And unfortunately, in the United Nations, only the Assad regime is recognized as the sole representative of Syria. So most of that aid has to go to whatever areas they're allowed by the regime. He starves entire populations that are against him.
I came to this camp from the beginning of its establishment. They were about 500 people. Now they become 4,000 people. أخي أبو محمد شو بينقصكم من مخيم حضرين؟
الله يجزيك الخير.
والله شايلة همكم، والله بعرف الضغط عليك كبير والله.
يعطيك العافية.
نحن صرنا بضيعتنا ما صرنا هون 20 يوم، بس كنا في ضيعت صرنا ناسين 5 أشهر بضيعتنا. هذا ثاني يوم، بس هلا كلها على الأرض شايلين. هلا شالوها بالجرافات. عملوها أرض معركة.
These kids are missing a formal education. They're not going to class. They're not only that they're not having a normal life, but their futures are ruined. Imagine you miss first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade. Imagine what would happen if you have a whole generation because of Bashar that is uneducated. What would happen to the whole country's future? That's what's scary.
To find your country, your people became homeless because of this dictator, and all these children and women without any house. It's something too difficult.
Yes, of course. How are you? Great to see you again. How are you? You know, what you were saying earlier is right. The most important thing in providing humanitarian aid to Syria, specifically in the north and liberated and contested areas, is to do it through civilian governing structures. And aiding humanitarian aid through these governing structures is the only way to really push back against some of these groups that have very specific agendas. You know, we have huge amounts of money that are coming from religious establishments based in the Gulf that go to militias, to armed groups inside of Syria. And that money is used for arms, but at the same time it is used for consolidating governance. And that's what's most disturbing. Things like Ahrar al-Sham, and then you go sort of another step higher like Jabhat al-Nusra. We have to be able to send humanitarian aid, but with a bigger strategic plan. We have to know that they need flour, they need oil, they need clean water and so on, they need medicine, but at the same time, they need to have a civilian police force. They need to have red lines.
هذا بياكل مش كثير.
هلا بدك تنزل شوي.
مش بياكل كثير هذا.
يعني على 13.
متر ونص بياكل 12.
يعني على 13. بدك تعملي 35 قطعة أنت.
لا مبدئيا بجوز بعد.
يعني بعدين لسه بدي أطلب أكثر وأكثر هيني
دفعات.
دفعات.
لما يصير 10 ليرات ال 12 بس.
لا 15 يلا تمام 15 يلا خلص توكلنا على الله. In this week we will prepare our office. We will have our new furniture. We will have our new uniform for civic police inside Syria. All Syria. We are preparing now civic police uniform. It's very important week. شوفوا هذا الشعار هون لازم نحن نحطه هاي بوليس.
الجمهورية العربية السورية. العربي؟ ايه. تحت قوى الأمن الداخلي.
And maybe it will be the design for all Syrian civic police.
And what is this logo exactly? Where does it come
Syria,
from?
for Syrian police.
It was always, Syrian Arab Republic is a controversial name. I mean, not everyone in Syria is happy with the old name, you know. The Kurds, for instance, would like to have it different.
يعني لساتنا ما حتى الدولة تقوم على رجليها ممكن نتغير اسم الجمهورية تكون اسم ثانية وهي كانت.
So this is a temporary. It will be a temporary.
I'm not sure, but inshallah it will be. And when all villages saw this, see this uniform, they would ask me to make the same. Also, we can unify all the civic police. It's good. There will be a new feeling.
NPR's Deborah Amos has this story about a 26-year-old woman whose dream of teaching English literature is on hold as she plays the role of an international activist.
Last November, we were crossing into Syria along a smuggler's trail. Razan Shelab El-Sham led the way, heading to the farming village of Herbert El-Joz to deliver an unusual kind of aid, police uniforms. For her, it was a critical mission. The uniforms, a symbol of what she wants Syria to become, a democratic country with a civilian police force.
For the revolution, I was so proud person. I was like, silly life. I was only caring about myself, how to appear in front of my society, and how to be like better than the others. And revolution affected me a lot. This is the trouser. Individual supporters, Syrian people who live now in America, paid for that through our organization, Syrian Emergency Task Force. Look, the most important thing is he will change his wearing from soldier military uniform to civil uniform, civil police uniform. This is the most important thing. لكن هنا
بس متكلم انا مرتاح سراحتنا مخضيه هوني اللي بيجي من دوريته بيرتاح هوني الحرس بريح هوني
ونحن هدفنا هو مساعدة النازحين من القرى الثانية بتأمينهم بالقرية واسكانهم يعني.
مشان الاهالي منطقه محرره بالضبط مشان الاطفال النساء الشيوخ الكبار بالعمر بس نحن كمجاهدين الارض ما محرره مرور بنحب نكون فيها اكثر من الارض محرره بس هون اجباري يعني بضل قسم مننا هون مشان المدنيين يامنهم اكلهم شربهم مشاكلهم بيوتهم.
الله يهلكوا الله لا يوفقوا 9 اشخاص الله لا يوفقوا هن يمشوا معي يأمنونا من بيت لبيت وحياة الله ما تركونا أبدا بعد جينا لهم ما تركونا هن يمشوا معنا من بيت لبيت الله يوفقنا ربي ويحميهم.
Now, were you trained to do this? How do you know how to do this?
Everything was learned out of
by ourselves and without any education about like how to do it, how to work with people, how to work with the international community. It's by, I don't know.
The uprising in Syria began 19 months ago, but President Assad remains in power, helped in no small part by opposition that is fragmented and fractious. A fresh attempt will be made in the coming days in the Gulf state of Qatar to bring together these disparate elements, but there's no promise of progress towards a common, united opposition front.
The United States was hesitant in providing major support for the Free Syria Army in general because there was no real political roadmap, and I think they feared what could come afterwards in terms of extremists that would take over, and it would be something worse than Assad. We're meeting members of parliament.
Let's go through the door there, please, and when you go through.
What we wanted to show that on the local level you can have civilian councils that provided an example of what post-Assad Syria could be.
Things seem to have gone from bad to worse. Yes. And you've been back in the country since we met?
Yes, twice.
Well, the question I raised with you in America was the longer this goes on, the more of a problem there is in terms of extremism and jihadism.
Sure.
Is there any evidence that that's happening now? Undesirable elements coming in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to lie to you and say no, but yes. 7 months ago, 6 months ago, we did not have Al-Qaeda in Syria, and we told this to the U.S. government, we told this to everybody we spoke to, and we said they'll come if you don't, and they're here. And look, at the end of the day, people are desperate for anyone to help. So if you're next to someone shooting at somebody, bombing your whole city, you don't care if it's the devil. You just want someone to help you.
When we were in America, you and your colleagues were saying that the two key needs you felt then were communications equipment and rocket-propelled grenades.
When it comes to the rocket-propelled grenades, I think that's out of the question, and I think that no-fly zone is also something that's out of the question. But you have, and I spent a lot of time with military.
But that's a change from your position in America, because that's one of the things that you were
I still want it.
But
I'm not going to lobby for it if it's not going to happen. And so within the parameters of policy, civilian councils fill in perfectly. They didn't include military aid. They didn't include no-fly zones. They didn't include troops on the ground. You know, all those red lines were not there.
So without a huge number of more people being killed, what is actually going to bring about a solution to all of this?
One way is supporting civilian governing councils. We adopted a village in Syria. It's only 2 kilometers from the border. And I was coming back in with people that came back to visit for the first time ever. We created a police force, 15 people, with a police chief, a civilian council. Here we have, I think, a perfect example of what a post-Assad Syria could be.
So are you really saying that the Americans, the French, and ourselves should coordinate this aid better to the civilian administrative council? Is that what
they're not
you're saying?
supported. They will no longer be an option. They'll lose their credibility and viability, and then the only options are a military rule or religious extremist rule. You have to vote.
I may have to. Let's just see. It may be a German. All right. Glad to see you.
This is my friend. He is the commander. Those are my friends. This is Samuel.
فمنهم من قضى نحبه بعون الله وقوته. نعلن تشكيل لواء الأمة في تل أبيض بقيادة المجاهد سامر هلال. والله ولي التوفيق. تكبير!
You should have your credibility on the ground and between the government which you are talking with, that if you give them any wrong information about what's happening, the real situation on the ground, they will say that you are not real activist. شكرا كثير Here is we are so close to the border, to Syrian border, but we will not go to Syrian border from this way. We have other way to go.
السلام عليكم.
أنا وصلت عليك الليست. لا أنا في واحد راكبي معه هلا هو قال لي أنا من طرف سامر. تل أبيض.
In order to work with civilian councils, you have to ensure that the fighting militias in the area are not interfering with civilian governance. And to do that, you have to talk to them.
بس ما في حدا هم اللي عمليين معنا براس العين.
هلا هي بالاصل هون شو بتعمل؟
ما هي صارت سرعوا وين هون هذا كمان اللواء؟ في هذا اللواء احرار اللواء كامل بضم 1800 مقاتل. هذا مكتب المسيح.
عم يرفع الفيلم؟
خلاص بشوفيهم بس ما بدون بس.
لا بدون بس.
من بلا تدخل حدا علينا وجيبوا لنا ايش تشربوا؟
شاي.
جيبوا لنا شاي هلا وتركوا لنا نشربوا. هلا في نحن بفيلق يعني تشكيل فيلق مؤلف من ألوية. في عنا أكثر من 700 واحد مسيحي. بالنسبة للأكراد بيطلعوا شي 3500. إذا بدك تفتحي اليوتيوب شوفي مشعل تمه رواية مشعل تمه وشوفي العجبات. فتحتي يمكن؟
لا.
هاي الشاي؟
في ولد أنا أقول لك عني؟
لا مش
شو قال لك عني بالضبط من أنا؟
نعمة السلامة. والله نورت. ايش شغلتها رزان؟ قال شغلتها كذا كذا كذا.
شو شغلتها كذا كذا؟ قلي فهمني بس. لا.
يعني مثل ما بدك تقولي انت عم يتم استخدامك لضبط الامور في داخل سوريا من قبل بريطانيا ومن قبل كذا دوله. عرفت شلون؟ انت شو؟ انت وسيله مساعده لهم لحتى يعطوكي لحتى تجيبي اكبر عدد من العسكريين اهم شيء عندهم وحتى ممكن يصير الدعم عن طريقك بس انه يسيطروا على الوضع في سوريا.
عم يتم استخدامي عشان آلة ماشين يعني عندهم؟
انا بدون هذا في صوت هون ما لازم.
اوكي فينيش ريكوردينج.
بدمائنا سنلون الفجر ونعود يا أمة النصرى بكفاحنا سنحول المجرى بكفاحنا سنحول المجرى بجهادنا نكسر فتنة الصبر ونمسك الطاغوت والكفر.
روح سجل اسمك باسمك. شو الشباب؟ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ضيف الشباب. اجل نحن نفتحه بطريقه. انت بدهم هذه الجبن الجلبيه. اثنين. الحازين بنستولي عليهم المعمل كمان تقولي الناس. لك الله ينعم كمان. لا امين الله ينعم يا زلمه فيه مليارات. المهم
هنا يلا بسرعة. المجلس العسكري كله نمشي؟ ايه روح. قل له خليه يمشي وراك، نزل بالليل يمشي وراك. كل السيارات ورانا، كل السيارات ورانا، يلا.
شو كنت تشتغل قبل الثورة؟
أنا كنت صاحب بأجر سيارات، مكتب سيارات. لا بقى تسألي شيء. على عين العرب، على عين العرب، على عين العرب. تكبير! تكبير! الله أكبر. اجت مؤازرة؟ اخروا. استنى مؤازرة طالعين بس ثواني. في عندك حدا؟ في لنا حاجز هونيك قريب، في لنا حاجز. دمج معه ونضرب. يلا ثواني. بدي اكبر عدد هون، اكبر عدد ضروري. يلا هاي راسك. بدك كبر.
بس يعني انكم تقوموا بهذا السلاح اللي معكم من هون المعركة ما فيكم.
سلاح معنا سلاح لسه ما وصل دقيقة بس.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. اللي يلا الله يرحمه. مين؟ السلام عليكم السلام عليكم. مين؟ والد رحيم وأبو أسد زعيم جوي. صباح الخير. خلصنا سلموا الكل. سلموا البكاكية أسلحتهم خالصين المعركة.
فيني ارجع ادفع على تركيا؟
كنت بتمنى هيك تخوضي معركة، لا تخافي، نحن رح نمشي بالنص. شوفي
بيجي مرة ثانية وبيجي بخوضة
كمان بصير.
I discovered that he is untrustable, he is thief, and I don't want to work, I don't want to support him. And here is the difficult thing, to select the right people and work with them.
يمكن نتعلق بالنور الحين يعمل بورد نشوف. على كل حال أنا معكم. مرحبا يا شباب.
ايه سامر؟ ايه حكاني؟ لا بقى تحكيني.
First, you should introduce yourself for him.
أبو عبد الرحمن السوري رئيس المحكمة الشرعية العليا في باب الهوى.
My name is Abu Abdul Rahman Al-Suri, the president of the High Sharia Council.
أنا أريد أن أنوه إلى مسألة مهمة جدا. كان حريا بالإدارة الأمريكية بدل أن تصنف جبهة النصرة على أنها جهة إرهابية أن تساعد الشعب السوري. سوريا لا تحوي الإرهاب، سوريا فيها ثوار، فيها مجاهدين يريدون حقوقهم فقط. نحن نعترض على التصنيفات.
Okay, Al-Qaeda is different than just Salafis, and Salafis are different than just Islamists, and Islamists are different than political Islam in general, and political Islam is different than civilian rule. Civilian rule is different than secular rule. Abu Abdul Rahman al-Suri and Harasham are the biggest target of Al-Qaeda. That's crazy, but that's the way it is.
You say you are not a Democrat. What does that mean?
شو معنى هالشيء؟
طيب تعليقا على قول نحن لسنا ديمقراطيين، نحن لسنا ديمقراطيين صراحة. ليس شرطا حتى تعرف آراء الناس أن تضع صناديق اقتراع. نحن نعايش الناس، نعيش بين الناس، نعرف طلبات الناس، نعرف ما يتطلع إليه هؤلاء الناس السوريون في كل المناطق المحررة على الأقل. كلهم يريدون أن يكون الشرع الإسلامي هو حاكما عليهم، لأن هذا الشيء فطروا عليه.
So he was against democracy, which I completely disagree with him on that. I feel that democracy is compatible with Islam. He doesn't, and that's why I call it extreme. But he's entitled to his opinion, and he was providing a service in areas where there were no courts, where the United States was not supporting anyone.
أنا أحب أن أنوه أن المحاكم الشرعية عندنا لا تختص فقط في فض النزاعات، هذا أمر مهم جدا. المحاكم الشرعية تدير المناطق المحررة كأنها دولة. تدير المناطق المحررة من كل النواحي، النواحي الإدارية، من النواحي الخدمية، الطبية، الإغاثية، من كل النواحي تشرف عليها المحكمة الشرعية.
So we are running these liberated areas as a full operating country, as a state.
It's terrible. It's horrible if international community doesn't involve to stop what's happening on the ground. We will face like really Islamic State in whole Syria.
كان اجتماعات مع البريطانيين والامريكان، فالمجلس الامن القومي والخارجيه الامريكيه والبريطانيين السفير البريطاني الاثنين سالونا انه نجي لهون ونشوف ناسس بهي المنطقه بالنسبه للمحاكم المدنيه والشرطه المدنيه، مشان هيك هلا هذه البنايه هي المحكمه. ممتاز يا غزال.
فنحن هون حاليا نيجي نشوف المبنى ونطلع عليه. هون هاي منطقة المخفر، وفوق بالطابق الثالث هي المحكمة رح تكون. إن شاء الله خلال أسبوع 10 أيام بتكون جاهزة المحكمة اللي تبدأ عملها بالمناطق المحررة. لأنه يعني كمحكمة مدنية الناس بحاجة لسوريا الحرة الديمقراطية.
وين بعيد؟
هذا أهله ماتوا.
بالعيش شافوا الأولاد جابوا صارت عمس.
Woven into the great seal of the United States is a phrase, a motto, a rallying cry. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. One nation. The balancing of beliefs, opinions, and desires happens here.
Do you see the White House? How do you not see the White House? It's like the most important thing in all of Washington.
Update us on your latest thinking on where you think things are in Syria.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
Meet her. She knows Deborah very well, by the way. Susanna works for NPR. These are the bosses of the State Department. These are the bosses of the Congress. This is the gatekeepers for the president.
No?
Yeah.
We said that we would provide some assistance to the opposition in thinking about how would a political transition take place.
Rule of law, transitional justice. This. So this is the situation on the ground. This is the threat. The threat is Sharia courts and others. This is the way to fix it. Faster support. This is it.
We
we said support these civilian administrative councils because these are the viable option we have. The other two options are militants or religious scholars. We want civilian rule in Syria.
We have now two wars, one against the regime and one against the extremists.
So we're going to all these different areas. Sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. When it sticks, they start hitting civilian councils, they start giving equipment, and we implement it for them. And then there's things that are outside the parameters of U.S. policy that the president has not allowed, and what we do is to push that envelope.
Ibrahim Safian here says, keep out of Syria. Do you people never learn? Maz, I know you just came back from the border, so I know your views are probably even more strengthened by what you saw there.
We keep comparing interventions that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan to the things that are happening with the Arab Spring. These are two different things.
This isn't like Iraq or Afghanistan. Remember that the Syrian people are calling for intervention. They're calling for the international community led by the United States to act.
I think this is a civil war that already too many countries and too many weapons are involved with. The United States getting involved with can only make it worse.
Lance, quickly, what assurance can you give when people say, well, there's going to be a vetted opposition, that in the midst of a war zone, that weapons aren't going to, say, move around?
Well, first of all, remember, weapons are coming in regardless. Whether we arm or not, weapons are coming in from Gulf states, from other places, regardless of that fact.
What plausible case is that for reducing the humanitarian disaster as opposed to simply prolonging it?
It's important for the United States, which vets when it does give weapons, to give weapons to the right people. And we're not saying give weapons to everyone.
You should ask the Somali people if the United States vets its
Let me finish the sentence. Ma'aj, the AFP reported that there were up to 6,000 or upwards of 6,000 Al-Qaeda members fighting alongside the rebels.
Let's go. يا عيني تفضل. اخبار السيئة انه بشار عنده 150 درون. Are you fucking serious?
150 شو؟
150 امتى؟
150 طيارة.
درون.
ده يروحوا دفعة واحدة؟
فرد مرة، أي أول دفعة. ثاني دفعة دبابات. حنخلع
ليش
عليه.
شكرا عم يعملوا هيك؟
مصاري.
ومين دفع مصاري؟ لكن هدول شو عملوا هاي الشركة الأمريكية؟
راحوا على يوكرين لقوا السلاح. أخذوا مصاري من بسمرة. عملوا ملايين، نحن اللي عملنا.
ما مش على الحل.
بدي اتصال مباشر مع إدريس.
إدريس ستيت ديبارتمنت طب بتصل معك.
أيوة.
ستيت ديبارتمنت شو بدهم
حتى تترى مدريان.
مع إدريس ليش؟
بدي اياك تتصلي فيه مباشرة تصير تنسق لك مع خمسة في الشام. وأنا بعطيك كل الجماعة تبعين الشام. فوكس على العمليات، سيكريتاري، اوكي؟ بس
This is my mother. She's the most important. This is my sister. She is younger than me. This is my youngest sister. Crazy, crazy one. Everything in my life.
MashaAllah. This is Rizan's office. أنا خلص اللوت تبعي. صورينا. طيب وصلوا لك المصاري يعني قلت له لابوك يمكن يعطوك شويه مصاري. قال لي والله 67 ألف دفعنا بكم شهر من وراء الثورة من وراء النظام. الله أعلم. شكرا الحمد لله بخير طمني عنكم. السلام عليكم كيفك؟ كيف أخبارك؟
بسم الله الرحمن وقت اللي كانت بالمدرسة بالثانوية هي الوحيدة اللي كانت السباقة في الفتوبة شو حزبي نشاط حزبي.
She was the بالبعث. وين نحن؟ الله
يونغ
When she was young in high school. نترجم هذا؟
المشاركة بهيك أمور كانوا So I was so active and crazy from the beginning. So what I'm doing now is normal for my family because they used to have this kind of crazy children.
Democracy is something that you're raised into from childhood. You learn it from the beginning.
وهاي أول ديمقراطيات عندنا.
And this is the first democracy, true Democrats that we have, that they are from the beginning.
And the sunshine family.
تكبير.
هيا هيا لسري لهم بالليل هيا هيا ولمشي عديا وندعبت رجلي لمشي عديا.
خير مرة تانية. أنا بتشكركم لوجودكم معنا اليوم بالدورة. أنا بعرف إنه أنتم كتير تعذبتوا اليوم لحتى وصلتوا لعنا. أكيد كل وحدة فيكم لو ما كان فيها ميزة قيادية ما كانت حضرت معنا الدورة. على الثورة التونسية، الثورة المصرية، الثورة الليبية تم تهميش المرأة النساء بعد الثورات عندهم. فنحن ما بدنا يكون مصير المرأة السورية مهمشة بعد الثورة بعد كل هالتضحيات اللي قدمتها خلال الثورة. اعتقلوني بقيت حطوني منفردة بقيت 30 يوم بالمنفردة. أنا ممنوع أنا أتواصل مع العالم الخارجي، كانت وقت أكبر جريمة. أنا من السجن من الفرع قدرت أنا أكتب لها رسالة لماما. كانت حروف الرسالة إنه كوني فخورة، كوني فخورة. أنا بنسك اللي ربيتيني إني أكون حرة، إني أكون صاحبة كبرياء عالي، إني ما أكون غير أنا بنسك بقيت هيك حتى وإن أنا كنت هلا السلاسل بإيدي وهلا أنا ورا هالباب. رح أبقى أنا مثل ما أنت علمتيني، فخليكي فخورة فيني، أنا ما حأنكسر. كيف بيطلعوا هيك؟ كيف بيطلعوا بسيارة بهالبساطة بيسلم رامي حاله كنان؟ راح أجن يعني. عم نستناهم كنا بالدقيقة ليوصلوا لهون على تركيا. أخذتهم المخابرات الجوية.
They were all going to see Razan outside is because we didn't let her go inside. And instead of bringing flash drives, they brought laptops.
How widespread is the damage?
Huge. Everything we have.
The regime now knows everything's about our network inside homes. All the people say that we should forget the guys. They will kill them.
Do we know if the original activists are still alive?
The ones that were caught?
Yeah.
We have one guy at least we know is still there. We have to get him out. We have to get everybody else out that has any name on there soon, Antakya or wherever, but they need to leave.
عماد لازم تترك حمص. لازم تترك حمص انت ومحمود. ممكن ينجاب اسمك بسهولة. تعال لعندي. يا أخي انتوا بس قولوا لي بدكم تتركوا حمص أنا بجيبكم. Because of the terrible situation for Rami, he was disabled to walk, and after all this torture which he received, we heard, but we are not sure that he died. But I think that it's something I can't believe that he died. It's revolution. Nothing is cheap. We should sacrifice. Shakespeare, it's my favorite books. I learned from the stories that not all the stories end by good or happy ending. So now, and what we are facing now, like we have all the time like bad news. But when I heard about this bad news, next day I forget all of them. Because it's a new day, we should start from the beginning. نساء يريدن التغيير وسوريات يريدن التغيير. فأنتم قراركم. سوريات نحو التغيير. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11
First of all, we've never had in Syria for 50 years, almost 50 years, real elections.
Have you seen a real election?
No.
You've never seen one yourself?
No. We're dying to vote. This is like a dream for us. That someday we will go into a real elections and vote for the right person.
يعني تروحوا هلا على مناطقكم. انتوا قياديات. شكرا. كده بابا. تسلم. سوريات نحو التغيير.
This hearing, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. Ambassador Ford.
The administration's policy, Senator, has consistently been that only a political settlement will provide a durable and sustainable end to the Syrian crisis.
That's really entertaining, because the only way that there would be a negotiated settlement is if Bashar Assad thinks that he's going to lose. I don't know what it takes for you all to understand. The woman, one of the leaders of the refugee camp in Jordan, that said, Senator, see these children? They're going to take revenge on those who refuse to help us. I have no more questions.
Was the U.S. reluctant to arm the opposition until it found a credible partner?
The United States has not been waiting for any credible partner of anything, right? So they were saying we don't know who we're dealing with because they didn't want to give arms to anyone. They were saying we don't know what will come after because they didn't want to be involved in another war. All those excuses which tried to alleviate all the time were excuses. So we just came to the point to figure out that even if you alleviate all these concerns, it didn't really matter. There's a policy, and the policy is not to get stuck in any way, even with, obviously without troops on the ground in this case, but in any way militarily in another conflict in the Middle East, that was a no.
We're going to show you the videos. I want to first caution viewers that some of the images in these videos are disturbing. It was shot, filmed on the date of the chemical weapons attack, the intelligence community says.
قوم عمو قوم بابا قوم بابا قوم قول يا رب لك يا عالم لك شوفوا لك فلسطين لك يا لك شو مسوي ان شاء الله شو مسوي انك كل لك
These images are difficult to watch. We are showing them to you because it is part of what senators and members of the House are being shown.
Look, if the red line is not to be acted on, for the love of God, at least give us the medications for chemical weapons until they can evaluate whether it was fully used on a scale big enough or large enough to constitute a crossing of the red line.
That's big news. The United States has confirmed that chemical weapons has been used in Syria.
What are we to make of this headline? Has a red line been crossed or not?
The president clearly stated that it was a red line and that it couldn't be crossed without the United States taking vigorous action.
Syria so much. My name is Muaz Mustafa with the Syrian Religious Desk for Free Syria, and these are Syrian Americans who come from across the U.S. to advocate, especially with the disturbing news of the use of chemical weapons.
Yeah, chemical weapons. I mean, what more has to be done?
That's the question. I can assure you that nice to see you. I can assure you we won't stop. We will continue to struggle for the people of Syria, and unless something happens different, it's a stalemate.
Yes.
We have a saying that I'm sure you're familiar with. You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, you are. You are really
The Russians sent S-300 missile systems, air defense systems, and tanks, and weapons. There are 2 flights from Tehran on a daily basis in the morning and at night with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons. These are admirable allies of the regime. The West and the free world and the rest of the world are very, very disappointing allies because we get a lot of talk, yet no action. So he arrives the 28th and the 29th, and I plan to take him inside the country. It's cool that he trusts me to do that. think now he sees it more urgently, so he wants to go. This could be like his Benghazi moment. What's the Benghazi moment? He went to Benghazi, he came back, we bombed.
السيناتور جون ماكين على غرفة الجمارك جوا بسوريا على الحدود. فشو هو الجيش اللي واقف هنيك على الحدود مشان الجيش مثلا ما يوقفونا بكره؟
مشان نحكي عن النقاط لأنك شو كان.
اللواء محمد فارس بده يأسس الجيش الوطني، عم يحاول يشق الصف مع فريق البيس ويأسس الجيش الوطني.
عشان كلهم يعوصوا بعض.
كانوا هناك وقال لي ابو علي انه راح يبقوا هناك بانتظار.
Our purpose from taking Senator McCain to inside Syria is that to put more pressure on the President Obama's administration.
What do we know about Senator McCain's trip to Syria?
America's leading advocate of intervention in the Syrian crisis spent about an hour in the country.
So John McCain went to Syria to solve the crisis and show the Obama administration just how easy it is to tell the good guys from the bad guys.
He appears to have met the head of the Supreme Military Council, that's the governing body of the Free Syrian Army, General Salam Idris.
المخاوف من وصول السلاح إلى أيدي غير أمينة هي مخاوف ليست في محلها.
What was the main message to Senator McCain from the Free Syrian Army?
They had provided, they said, to the State Department previously evidence of the use of chemical weapons, and yet when these red lines are placed, it is more of a green light for Bashar al-Assad.
What was the senator's message to the Free Syrian Army?
The thoughts and prayers of millions of Americans are with you. I will never rest until we meet again in Damascus.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is that all right?
That's perfect, Senator. I don't know how much.
We'll see you next week then.
Yes, sir?
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Safe travels.
All worked according to plan, except for this one small thing.
Well, according to a report, Senator McCain can be seen in that picture posing alongside two men who may be behind the kidnapping of 11 Lebanese Shiite Muslims just last year.
Apparently, none of the individuals the senator planned to meet with was named Mohammed Noor or Abu Ibrahim, and none of them identified themselves as Mohammed Noor or Abu Ibrahim, which is kind of the point. It's a murky situation, and not everyone is going to be wearing their "Hello, I'm a terrorist" name badge. Or their "Ask me about my kidnappings" button.
And then some guy in the picture outside that wasn't in the meeting, who isn't the person that they're talking about, the person they're referring to is actually dead, comes out off a report from a Hezbollah channel in Lebanon. So it's very disturbing to see how Hezbollah propaganda has overtaken the word of a senator, the State Department, Syrian American NGOs, and the Free Syria Army Command. That, after all of that, it's just bullshit. Yeah.
When I hear stories like that, it makes me really... Wait, hold on one second. When I hear stories like that, it makes me, and I think people who hear those stories, really worry about what we are about to get into in Syria. And I want to bring in my friend and colleague Jeremy Scahill, and I want to talk about what...
Europeans and Americans are not any more special than anybody else in the world. Everybody deserves democracy and freedom and universal human rights, and that's what they want, and that's what they deserve. Unfortunately, the world completely left us.
بس بيساعدنا كلنا؟
خلي لا
ما اجيتك تخبريني؟ اكيد شيء انا ما كنت رح اكون هيك لماما. كمان هيك شباب سوريا، كمان هيك اطفال سوريا اللي رح يكبروا اذا ما كانوا امهاتهم هيك، امهاتهم عم يعمقوا عندهم الوعي، امهاتهم رح عم يوعوهم، عم يكبروا لهم احلامهم، فما رح يكون عندنا جيل فعلا يحافظ على هاي الثوره. بالاضافه انه هي رح تكون صعبه بالبدايه لانه سوريا يعني مهدومه، بدها اعاده بناء من جديد. فانا لو سقطت النظام رح تابع دراستي وراح اكون مع الاجيال رح تبني سوريا.
بدنا اياكم انتم هون تمثلونا وتوصلوا كلمتنا.
I can't imagine even that these women will be again in danger. It's not fair what's going on in Syria. It's not fair at all. Someone should stop him from killing these people.
Nobody has the connections we have at this point, or even close. But that's why it's our failure that nothing has happened, and that's why it's on our shoulders to do something, and it's our obligation. So far we have failed. Until the regime falls, we're sort of failed at everything.
This is my life.
Ask me if I changed. I've changed to find out that the world is a nasty place, and a lot of people only act based on what is in their best interests.
Here, I'll show you.
So this was like a residential home. It was bombed by the regime. So there was shelling. These other guys were trying to like defend the neighborhoods. It's really bad. So that sometimes we should think of others, because I think that's the only thing that will carry on beyond our short lives.
With many dangers, this menace must be confronted.
can we stop? It's impossible. And after all these crimes, after all these people who are killed, at least we should respect them. Their blood should not be gone without any punishment for this regime.
Special guest here. It was kind of teased out in the social media, but I would like to invite Moaz Mustafa to join me up here. Thank you. To exhale usually after this film. And unfortunately, as I teased out in the beginning, it's not a story that you kind of leave buoyed or uplifted, but I think it is one that's important to engage us and for us to be more aware of what's happening in the world around us, and specifically in the Syrian conflict. I think that we see numbers, lots of numbers, big numbers, and they seem very abstract. And behind every single one of those statistics, there was a beating heart, there was a soul, there was a person. And this is now, upwards of 200,000 people have been killed. We're looking at March, it's going to go into the 5th year of the uprising. And what we tried to demonstrate here as well was how everything started. People are talking about ISIS now. That's all they're talking about. But there's a context to how was an ISIS allowed and enabled and empowered to be as strengthened as they are. So I think that the film helps us see incrementally how things started to unravel. There has been of late some announcements of movements by the administration to support some of the Syrian moderate opposition, give them like pickup trucks with communications equipment, machine guns. But the problem is the policy is still flawed. And Moaz and I tend to always put it out there that we don't see this as a partisan point. We're both Democrats. He worked for the Obama campaign. I didn't work for the campaign, but I could have. And so it was more a disappointment and looking at our foreign policy and geopolitics and how we were making decisions and continue to make decisions. Because now we're starting to do things we should have done 3 years ago. The window is really closed in terms of what we can do to make a difference. They always felt that it could be contained, just like ISIS could be contained, and none of those realities are playing out. And it's a really tragic situation because if you look at it, since the chemical weapons agreement or brokering of a pact with Russia, you had over 100,000 non-combatants, civilians killed, since the chemical weapons. So those kinds of facts on the ground make it very hard to be supportive, at least in my opinion, and Moaz and I don't agree on everything, of what's happening on the ground now. And I think that's important to talk about, and important for you all to just, when you're reading the news or seeing the news reports, to have a little more context to understand and be able to process what you're actually receiving as far as media. Do you want to?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to in screening this very important movie that Andrea was so brave, along with Oliver and others that worked on this, of making, because it included many times going inside of Syria, a country that's obviously in chaos and liberated in contested areas where lines are shifting constantly. So it was very brave of her to actually be able to tell this story, which is, I think, really important to tell. And it gives you an idea of where things were, where they are now. And it does leave sort of with a lot of unanswered questions and in the middle of things, because it ended, I mean, it's still honestly ongoing. Andrea might as well be videotaping now sort of the work that's being done and where we are and what's going on, and you know, at least what we're trying to achieve going forward for a country that has been so wronged by a horrendous dictator, by extremists, and so deserted by the international community and its allies, by the United States, when the United Nations was impotent to move due to the Russian veto. And so it continues to be a very sad story, but at the same time there continue to be so many people on the inside that are doing amazing work. And all these internally displaced refugees, you got 6 million, for example, in northern Syria. When you talk to them, they're still it's still very simple to them. It's still a struggle that they were asking for their dignity, for their freedom, for their human rights, for democracy, and they continue to do so. And for us and people looking from the outside, sometimes it's very complicated. There's a lot of geopolitical sort of movements going on, different agendas of different regional nations, and calculations by the US and the ISIS sort of element that's added to it. But what's beautiful about them is they still see it as this very simple thing. If you talk to a widow, or if you talk to someone who lost his sister or brother or son or whatever, and you ask them, why are you in an internally displaced camp under some tree in northern Syria? They say, because we went out and we asked for our freedom, and we'll continue to ask for it until we get to it. And that's what's so inspiring. I mean, that's in a very depressing sort of overall situation, what keeps at least me and Razan and so many others going in terms of working on the outside, because we're working for the real heroes that are inside the country every day. And I'm leaving actually Friday to go back to the border, and just found out a little bit ago to continue working with these guys. So it's quite amazing. I want to really get to your questions because there's so much to talk about, so I don't want to take up more of your time. But I just want to really thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and for giving us the opportunity to screen this film here. We really appreciate it.
Kirsty, thank you both for sharing the story, and Moaz for your extraordinary work. Okay, so thanking you both for your sharing the story and for your work. I'm wondering two questions. One is are UN agencies able to get out assistance to other areas outside of the Assad-controlled areas now, since the film was made? And secondly, what can we as civil society leaders do to support the Syrian people?
It still is a problem when it comes to UN agencies getting the stuff outside of regime-held areas. What's changed is the parity of UN member states donating to the UN to do that. So, for example, usually 100% of humanitarian aid from the US to Syria would go through the UN, and 100% of that will go through Assad sort of, avenues. What has been done is through a lot of lobbying and advocacy and other things, there's been a shift. So the parity is now, closer to, I don't know, maybe 70-30 or something like that, to where some of that other aid is being done through Syrian American NGOs, through humanitarian NGOs, whether that be IRC and all these different other great organizations that are doing this work. So not through UN bodies, but through other NGOs where nation states are donating directly to them as opposed through the UN. So that's been somewhat of a positive development overall. And your other question was, sorry. Oh, absolutely. So when it comes to, as far as civil society leaders here in the United States, the biggest thing that the Syrian people believe when you go down there and talk to them is that people don't care about their lives. That when two American journalists that flew to Syria to depict the suffering of the Syrian people because of how horrible their lives were, when they were taken and so heinously murdered by ISIS, we mobilized an international coalition to go after ISIS. But when an Assad regime killed men, women, and children, at least 200,000, over 150,000 in jail. Another thing, a development after this movie, right after, was the Caesar file, which is a photographer for the regime that has taken over 55,000 photos of people tortured to death, civilians. All of this evidence, all of this stuff did not move a single anything. It did give statements of condemnation and so on. And so it goes back to the fact that they feel so deserted that in a big role that civil society can do here in leadership in general, and anyone that wants to help, is to show solidarity with the Syrian people, to increase awareness and to show them, to send them messages in whatever way. And there's different ways of doing this, whether it's through social media or whether it is signing cards that you're sending to internally displaced camps or refugees outside the country, that we are with you. Even if our government doesn't move, if the international community is impotent to move through the UN, etc., we are with you. We think it's completely unjust what Assad is doing to you, and we see that just as horrible of an evil as ISIS is, because ISIS is also killing them. And so I think...
More than killing us.
Yeah, that's right, by far. But I think that solidarity, especially from civil society groups outside, it actually can make a huge difference, because for the most part, they're all civil society groups on the ground that have organized because there is no government that gives them the freedom to do so.
Everyone who works in this wonderful endeavor, and good luck. My question is geopolitical. This indifference that you speak about now on behalf of the United States, which I think is a focal point of the movie, but also of the Western world, but also of countries surrounding Syria. To what extent will ISIS play a catalytic role in changing the mobilization of indignation and support for the Syrian people?
ISIS itself takes advantage of the fact that the world didn't seem to care about the Syrians. That's the reason they were able to even come in. They used the vacuum of like for a long time we were, and you see in the movie in different parts, we were asking for civil courts to be established, civil police, all these things that are important. If you make sure that an area is not left in chaos, then we can even work on democracy from the ground up, and it worked in so many ways. But that aid was also very slow. So ISIS took advantage of the lack of caring of the international community to show that, look, ISIS is the only one that's going to come and fight against the regime. Now, they were so rejected by the Syrian people, as opposed to where you see ISIS in Iraq, for example, where it has some popular support, and it concentrated on what it saw was its biggest threat. So the biggest threat to ISIS are moderate Syrians. Regular Muslims and others and Sunnis and anyone else that's fighting against it from the indigenous population. So in their own jurisprudence, they've put it in a way where they say, okay, you got to go and kill all of these guys first because they're worse than the regime, right? They're like fake Muslims or whatever they want to say. And so I think that one good thing about ISIS is the fact that it makes people still remember Syria. When we bring up ISIS, we know that ISIS is in Syria, and so Syria is as sad and depressing as that is, that's the only reason we even pay attention. Otherwise, we can care less that this dictator, who doesn't even cater to Western, sensibilities, who supports Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations in the region, destabilizes the region, we're able to sort of turn a blind eye to all of his crimes. But the only way we're able to bring the focus on Syria is because ISIS is there. And because, by the way, the Syrian people are the only ones fighting it. Google ISIS in battles against ISIS. You'll not see anybody but Syrian moderate opposition fighting against them. There's only maybe one case where they were fighting against the regime in the Tabqa airport. And so I would say that ISIS takes advantage for the longer that we allow Assad to go unhindered in what he's doing. And even if ISIS itself, as ISIS was destroyed, something else will fill in its place if we do not address the root cause. which is the Assad regime. So we need to simultaneously fight against ISIS and the regime, as the Syrian people are doing every single day. I mean, as you saw in the movie, 2 of our guys were tortured to death by the regime and killed. 2 of our guys were beheaded by ISIS. And that really is just a microcosm of what's going on in Syria every day, that they're being fought by those 2 sides.
How do you combat the perception that we don't know who to support? There was a scene in the movie where Razan was meeting with a guy that you thought he was waiting for the weapons. I didn't understand that whole part, but she said he's not trustworthy. And that's someone she was exploring. So Jon Stewart has presented a similar viewpoint with respect to Israel. All we do is arm people. We don't know who we're arming. Is the U.S. answer just to keep arming more people? And he once showed a map of all the places we arm all around, the area. So.
Sure. So no, that's a really good question. And for example, with that specific part, he was saying that he's waiting for reinforcements because he had more people and people never showed up. So he was essentially lying about that he had either more weapons or more people, or that he had a bigger sort of control than what we thought he did. That specific trip is funny because, like, in the movie, you see one aspect. I mean, it was a long thing, and Oliver was banned from Turkey for like 2 years after that. The co-producer and Razan had actually sort of broken my direction of saying, don't go to this guy, because we already knew, we weren't sure about him. But she went anyway, and that happened. But it is emblematic of we're trying to vet in this very chaotic place who's good and who's bad. But we have, through 2 programs. The first program, which was the CIA covert program, had supported elements of the Syrian opposition that we had vetted beyond what you can imagine in terms of, from their mother's name to who they are, where they were, everything about them. We knew who they are, we knew everything about them. But that program itself was done in a sort of a reactionary mode. Look, Assad regime is so bad, we have to help the opposition. So because we're being forced to help them, okay, let's do it by choosing like individuals, arming them, and then we can say as a political talking point, yes, we have supported and we have armed the Syrian opposition. Something that we needed to do, just like I advocate on behalf of the Ukrainians that are fighting against the Russians, that we should also support the Ukrainian state that wants to be part of the EU, that wants to have a democracy, etc., etc. So it's important to support the right guys. We have found, we through that covert program and now through the DoD program, which is ongoing, we have people that we know very well who they are, that go under a civilian state, that are under the interim government's control in the coalition, the political opposition coalition that exists, that have even written out statements of their being sticking by human rights, by Geneva Conventions, by all these things, that have offered for each bullet or each weapon or anything to have that written down and returned at the end of the day. Most of them are defectors. The guarantee of a secular civilian guys is that they were defectors from the army. They were part of a secular army that was the regime's army, and when the regime was ordering it to kill its own people, they defected. And now these are generals that have been sitting for months. The honorable people left everything. Their lives got destroyed. Their families were killed for their defections, and we've left them sort of out to dry. So we're not calling to arm crazy people like that guy that we saw. I was even against vetting him because I wasn't, there was too much doubt about him. But we have very many moderates that we know exactly who they are, that are fighting against ISIS. In Idlib province, we got rid of ISIS, the Syrian opposition there, in 6 days. Decimated ISIS, completely eliminated it from there in 6 days. In Aleppo province, where they were well entrenched, in 27 days, moderate opposition forces got rid of ISIS with negligible to zero support from the United States, and not even a point, the Secretary of State or anyone else, nobody came out and said, we appreciate the Syrian opposition getting rid of ISIS in 2 major provinces. Yet, ISIS comes with American weapons that they took from Mosul, that are far more advanced than anything that we're even asking for the moderate opposition. And the regime in Hezbollah and the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, are getting weapons from Iran and Russia. And so it's almost such a crazy thing to say that we're having to take these guys that are actually fighting against 2 horrible evils and adversaries of the U.S. and contemplating and arguing and re-arguing whether we should help them or not, while our enemies, the U.S.'s enemies and the Syrian people's enemies that are being fought against by these people, have the most advanced weapons of every kind. It's so ironic. And so I would say those two things, that we know who the good guys are. It's not as cloudy as it may seem, especially in the South, for example. You have no Nusra, you have no ISIS. And number two, we are making them go through all of these things when the actual people they're fighting have all kinds of amazing weaponry. We took a congressional delegation a few months ago, Democrats and Republicans, to the border, and we had them meet it was right after the beginning of our international coalition operation. We had to meet with these generals, defected generals from the FSA and others, and they played out. They showed them all these files of all this intelligence they have on ISIS, on the front lines that they're fighting. They asked for tank shells to fight ISIS snipers in the northeastern part of Aleppo, and they were saying, please, anything you can do to give us some coverage so the regime isn't bombing our locations as we're fighting ISIS. And the members of Congress were really surprised. They were like, all this intel, do we have it? No, we don't. Why? Because we don't even talk to them. We haven't even begun in a real way of talking to them. Now, all that being said, there's also Saudi Arabia and Qatar and all these other countries that are arming willy-nilly whoever they think serves their best agenda. And that's not the people that we want to support as Syrians, not just as the United States government, because they don't hold the core values that we have. But Syrians are forced to go fight under their sort of flags of these different battalions because they're the only ones that are supporting, and they have to defend themselves and their families against both ISIS and the regime. So as long as we are too iffy about sitting down at the table, taking a real leadership role, and uniting the funding through a mainstream, one sort of fluid way, we'll always have all these divided groups that are doing their own thing, and we'll always have Qataris and Saudis and Emiratis and others that are funding their own proxy battalions. With sometimes differing agendas as opposed to one way where everyone sort of stands in line behind us.
Let's talk a little bit about the movie, the title, Red Lines.
Yeah,
Obama's
well, let me
Red
just
Line.
add one point to this. And of course, in the Middle East, nothing is black and white. There are shades of gray. And this is not the same as 50 Shades of Gray. So there's lots of gray areas, but that doesn't mean you throw your hands up and you just say, oh, this is too complicated. We can't vet, we can't try to coordinate our efforts. And I think that the most important thing is that we have to recognize that whatever groups that we're arming or training or coordinating with, if we don't settle on a policy that specifically targets Assad either to step down or to negotiate some kind of transition, there will be no reliability. These guys, and that's my opinion, I don't know if Moaz agrees with me, but I think that it's going to continue to be a flawed foreign policy until we take that turn to face Assad. And we're not doing that because we need Iran in Iraq. And we don't want the Iranian Republican Revolutionary Guard to turn on our soldiers in Iraq. So it's a real problem because it's not a far-ranging kind of 30,000 feet view. And you'd think because we're so late and even coming into the game that we would have actually evaluated all the components a little bit better with a little more imagination. But I just feel like nothing even that we're doing right now has that high a probability of working because it's little, it's late, and it doesn't address Assad. And until you address Assad, the war is going to go on.
You can't tell people go fight ISIS, and now our policy is to fight ISIS, so we're going to arm you to fight ISIS, but don't use these weapons or this training against Assad ever. When Assad is bombarding them every day, like it's so crazy for Syrians to understand, but it's our policy. Like that's what's laughable, or I don't know whether we should laugh or cry about it, but the fact is that our policy is go fight ISIS, don't do anything to the guy that's like barrel bombing you every day. I mean, there's so many more horrendous things that have happened since you've seen this stuff. It's unbelievable.
So more people have even been killed by barrel bombs than chemical weapons at this point. So here, even if we succeeded to evacuate not all of the chemical weapons, but most that they could at least report to inspectors, then he turns to use another kind of bombing method, which is even more indiscriminate.
And use chlorine, which is another chemical weapon that is not
and metal
registered.
shards and pieces that when it lands with usually very little target specificity,
There's no targeting
just explodes
of
and shatters
these barrel bombs.
everywhere. So there are more people that have died since.
I've seen the
the
barrel
attack
bombs
was
leave
signed.
like a meter down sort of crater, and it goes out 500 meters all around of just shrapnel. It's just shrapnel and gasoline in a big drum, in a big barrel that they drop down on just civilians. And most of the time on the front lines where the moderates are fighting ISIS. ISIS and the regime aren't friends, but they have mutual interests, and that mutual interest is you got to destroy the one thing that the world can come support, which is the Syrian people. That again, initially in a 9-month peaceful, nonviolent protest, went out every day. So as long as we try to ignore the Assad regime or facing or addressing it because it's not politically convenient, or because we're trying to pursue a deal with Iran, or whatever it is that the reasons may be on the nuclear weapon, that remains a problem. We cannot be blind to the Assad regime. We should have a policy towards him. We do have a policy. He said, the president said, Obama, Bashar must step down. But other than that, there was nothing else added to that. And we're restricting the people we train from fighting Assad, which makes us not have ground troops we're losing every day as long as we don't support. Sorry, it was a long answer to your question. It was complicated.
Something about red lines, right? The backstory, or okay.
Hey, given that American policy in general is so driven by public opinion, and public opinion is in turn driven so much by the mainstream media, as much as I don't generally like mainstream media, what can the media do to help with the conflict in Syria?
Right. Well, the thing is, it takes in a lot of ways, it takes leadership. The person that puts things on the agenda is the United States president, and the person that sells things to the public is the United States president. You saw when there was an address, the U.S. president had put a red line of the chemical weapons. This is just one example, and then he came out with a speech. I remember the speech. I thought we were gonna have planes flying, and hitting Assad targets that minute. And he comes out very strong, and then he says he's going to send it back to Congress. But when he did show that there was a credible now threat of force against the regime that has done this horrible thing, all of the media was covering it. I mean, you saw Anderson Cooper, and you saw some of those scenes. And at that point, if you looked at polls, we went from like 30% or something wanting us to intervene in any way to like 65% wanting us to intervene right away. So the mainstream media or media in general can play a big role if they just simply report the facts on the horrendous crimes of the Assad regime, as well as ISIS, but we choose the more sensational ISIS and leave the Assad regime's regular, daily, way worse even crimes, not to say that anyone is better than another between ISIS and him. But it takes a president that would sort of put that back on the agenda. So if he wanted to sell it, he could. And he would put it, and I think the media would follow in that. If we're looking at it as the mainstream media, that would follow whatever is sort of on the agenda. But they could also do it, anyway. Like, for example, the Holocaust Museum put up the pictures of the Caesar file. Again, a photographer that took pictures for 3 years and leaked them out to us every single day, showing men, women, and children tortured to death, including Europeans, by the way, and others in those files. And there was some coverage of that, but if people would just talk about the fact that until today, that never again moment that is even being played at the Holocaust Museum every day is ongoing until today, that alone should make people feel outraged. We lived through Rwanda, and we think about it now and say, oh, we would never let something like that happen. We go through Bosnia, these other horrendous times in human history. We're living one right now. And we're all here, and it's normal, and no one cares. So it's so hypocritical, the never again thing. And then when people talk about that, that we would never allow such genocidal massacres to occur, we're allowing it to occur right now. We're not even covering it. So the media could make a big difference if they were to even cover that one specific aspect alone, forgetting barrel bombs, forgetting all these other things he's doing.
That's what Samantha Power said is, it's not never again, but it's again and again. And I think for the media, also what happens is, as a story is sustained where the conflict and the violence is ongoing, it's very hard for the media to keep the empathy sustained. So then the victims become victims of both the perception that nothing's going to change and also of the actual offense. And so part of the story that's lost here is this humanitarian catastrophe. That's really the story. It's not just what ISIS is doing in maneuvers, but it's all of the people that, half a country is living either in tents and shelters, outside of the country, or 6 million are wandering within the country, homeless. So you'll have half a population that is now uprooted. You've got 200,000 plus that have been killed, 150,000 in jails. The numbers are staggering. And so to let that kind of humanitarian catastrophe not be one of the prominent and dominant headlines of how the media covers Syria is one of the reasons why we stepped in, is the whole human side of this conflict has been missed. And that's, you know, a real tragedy. Because I believe in the American people and the passion of the American people, and even and of the West as well. But I feel that, unfortunately, this conflict and the humanity that has been lost and is at stake in this conflict has really been reduced to a very abstract concept. So it's hard for people here to really understand what's going on and how that has real life consequences and affects people on the ground. And I think that's the piece that's been missing. And as citizen journalists, there's a lot you can do. You can be blogging, you can be posting, you can be tweeting, just keeping the dialogue and the debate and the attention pointed to the humanitarian catastrophe.
And I'm happy to source you on all of that. If any citizen journalists want to we'll get you exclusives from the ground. We'll give you pictures that haven't been released by Caesar. 1 million people in southern suburbs of Damascus are under siege right now. Completely no food. They've like some had resorted to eat cats, and they've resorted to eat, as horrible as that sounds, grass and other things. In the eastern suburbs of Damascus, another horrible scene where we got 1.5 million people under siege that are completely. They get what, like 7 or more, like some places up to 15 barrel bombs a week in these areas on top of their besiegement. There's horrendous stories, and these guys, they don't even understand why no one is covering it. So it's important to at least bring that to light, and I think maybe that can help move people at least in terms of donating for their humanitarian aid.
Thank you both so much for coming to speak to us. You mentioned just now that you brought congressional leaders to the border. You showed them, oh, we have all this intelligence on ISIS that you don't have. In the movie, you said, this is more intelligence on Syria than anyone else has. How is this not getting through? Is this like an institutional lack that, somewhere in the State Department or in the Pentagon it's getting lost? How is it not getting through? Just this basic stuff.
How it's our policy is not to. It's difficult to say. Like, the problem is that at the White House, you have the president, you have Dennis McDonough, and you have Susan Rice, and you have Ben Rhodes, and these guys are not interested in a major shift in policy for other reasons. The major policy for the president in terms of foreign affairs is to make less weapons of mass destruction in the world than there are. And he was elected to get out of wars and not get involved in anything, not to get involved. That's all fair, and that's true. Nobody predicted that this would happen during his reign, but that's where leadership comes in. You've got to step up to the plate and stop that. I was down with General Nagata, who's in charge of the train and equip. An amazing general, understands everything, laid out in front of him what we've got, who he needs to talk to, and so on. He barely got permissions to go to Istanbul to even begin discussions with people that can help him with that. And he was saying, Muaz, I don't even know what to do. I'm supposed to train people and tell them, don't touch Assad, but only fight ISIS. That doesn't even make sense. But that's the policy giving to a general that has a mission and understands that part of that mission, if you want to really defeat ISIS, you've got to be able to do this and this and this. The congressional members, both the Republicans and Democrats, it was Engel, Ed Royce, Holding, and Kinzinger. You go speak to any of them today, they'll say there needs to be a safe zone, and we need to work with these guys, and we need to be able to, and that's the only way we can get rid of ISIS. On top of that, we released, just based on our more work and so on, 2 maps in the Wall Street Journal and the Daily Beast that showed since the beginning of our operations where ISIS was and where it is now. And I'm happy to send you those links, and it shows that they essentially doubled, if not tripled in size, due to our policy. And so even when we actually bombed, our mission creep wasn't to hit one of those runways that are barrel bombing the front lines with ISIS on the Syrian opposition side. Our mission creep was to hit other people we considered sort of extremists in Idlib province. without even coordinating with the opposition, which resulted in civilians being killed and resulted in people confused. The mission was ISIS, and and others joining us. And Nusra, those extremists that we wanted to get rid of in Idlib, actually expanded and took that part over. So it's micromanagement of the DOD and before that of the covert program under the agency by the administration, and a policy that is ambivalent to Assad. We don't want to deal with him. We want him to stay. We don't want him to fall for now, even though we say that we do, and that's a fact. And that's been the biggest problem. So the problem, I hate to say it, is just the president. He's not willing to shift on that. But yes, members of Congress have seen it. People have shown outrage. There's been all kinds of stuff. When we brought Caesar here, we put him in front of an open hearing in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And 3 members of Congress went to see the president after that hearing. It was Chairman Royce of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ranking Member Engel, a Democrat from New York, and Corker, who's currently the head of the Foreign Affairs Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When they met him, he was visibly angry. They said, you should have done something. But this is a story being told to me by the chairman himself. They said, you should have done something about Assad 3 years ago or after the chemical weapons attack and so on. And he slammed the table twice and he said, this is horse shit. That was the response. And we actually leaked it out to the media and it became an article on its own. I can send that as well. But that's how much he'd like not to deal with the Assad regime. And how much he'd like the only foreign affairs policy focus is to focus on a nuclear deal with Iran. And ISIS is just this thing that was added that's and what Assad is doing is sort of dragging us very slowly to being involved one way or another. The problem is when we're being dragged slowly and we're acting in a reactive mode, then our whole policy is flawed with missteps. It's really a non-policy. And finally, no options are good in how you address this, especially after so much time has passed. But again, the non-action for the United States is an option that we're pursuing. And I think if you weigh the risks of that inaction and you weigh the risks of all the other options that we may have, every other option, as terrible as it is and whatever risks comes with it, are far outweighed by the risks that we're facing now. And look what's going on.
So give us a vision for the future. Knowing all the things that you know, the global picture, the picture on the ground, what do you think is the best case scenario?
I'm going to try first.
I mean, we look at each other because it's bleak. The immediate future for Syria is bleak. You've got the numbers that we keep referencing that are living in refugee camps. What kind of life are they going to be raised in, reared in, immersed in, and then enter into our world? You're looking at a country that is just divided in half with all these warring factions and a lot of migration into the different areas, just trying to find safe haven. But even looking at all of that, what I try to communicate in the open is then I look at people like Moaz and like Razan and like the activists that I met on the ground and the activists I continue to meet here and in Turkey as I've followed this story for 3 years, and they're the hope. They're the hope because they're not giving up. And they're working tirelessly, they're working feverishly. They won't stop until there is some kind of resolution. And what I've heard is many of the activists, even whether it's in the refugee camps or in these villages that they're trying to create as safe zones, they're creating the Syria they want to see eventually outside of Syria. So that's one way, is to make sure that the refugees in the refugee camps are getting education, to help the refugees that are internally within the country, to show the Syrian people that there's solidarity. Most of ISIS members are not Syrian. So they're foreign fighters coming from all over, as far as Indonesia. So I think it's important that, yes, on the ground it's going to look pretty ugly, but there is some hope in some of these people and one person who's standing with us today.
She's too kind. The hope is in the people inside the country that continue to do this. Schools in besieged areas are running. Events, cultural events and artistic and other things are happening in a place where you think that never happens. Regular protests still go on in liberated and in other areas that continue on. The way things are now, it is horrible. So if we leave things the way they are, you know, if projecting into the future, it's terrible. ISIS will likely expand, the Assad regime and IRGC and Hezbollah will likely be more entrenched, greater crimes against humanity will continue, and the spillover will take over Lebanon and Jordan and Israel and all these countries that are, some of which are important allies to us. Iraq will continue to be unstable as it is and get worse and so on. That's if things stay the way they are. If I had a magic wand, I can do just a couple of things that can switch some tweaks to policy. Number one, first of all, in terms of our air campaign against ISIS, it must be done in coordination with the people that are fighting ISIS every day. So instead of just doing this sort of donut hole bombing of ISIS in the middle of their territory, where ISIS doesn't lose territory, maybe we kill off some of their leadership, but that's completely irrelevant. You can kill off as many of the leadership as you want. It's this thing that's, you know, so we need to hit the front lines. We need to have close air support, which means we need to have people on the ground. That it was just announced in the Wall Street Journal, what you're referring to, that will happen hopefully in the future to a limited degree, but it needs to happen in a big way, just like we did it in Kobani. In Kobani, the FSA and the Kurds, we all fought against ISIS and we liberated that area, but we armed them. We hit the front lines. We did close air support and dynamic targeting, and that's just a strategy against ISIS in that location, and that's how it resulted. And a safe zone in the north and the south is essential. We cannot allow the regime to regularly bombard these areas that are no longer under his control with barrel bombs, with Scud missiles, with all these horrible weapons regularly, because that's just unsustainable. That will increase extremism, that will do all these horrible things.
And it will give them a space, the Syrian opposition, to actually start
to govern, to
put the institutions in place that they started to initiate 3 years ago.
Absolutely, and that doesn't mean a huge operation where we're spending a bunch of money and where we're bombing targets for the Assad regime. It's a cowardly regime. If you just tell him, we have air assets over your skies, you're not allowed to bomb. He bombs the same places we bomb. So we bombed one night we bombed Raqqa, the United States, to hit ISIS locations. He bombed the next morning, killed 209 civilians, mostly children, not a single ISIS fighter in the same area. You know, in a region already rife with conspiracy theory, how am I supposed to explain to them that, no, we're not in cahoots with Assad regime, Iran, and Russia to kill all of you? No, the United States actually hates Assad and hates the ISIS and wants to get rid of it. I mean, this is how flawed this policy is, unfortunately, and it's because we're doing it just as a reaction. We're not really serious about a real strategy. So if we were to make those tiny changes, things could be a whole different way. If things continue as the way they are, it's really horrible. But even in a best case scenario and everything ends today, Syria has been destroyed. Its infrastructure, I mean, this regime doesn't care about the sanctity of life, but the sanctity of anything else, history, culture, destroyed the oldest synagogue in the world, destroyed the Croix de Chevalier, or bombed one of the oldest crusader. It's a beautiful country with so much history. He has no regard for any of it, and its infrastructure. And so even if everything ends today, we need 20 more years to go back to where things were at the beginning of the revolution. But you know, at the end of the day, the hope remains in the people. A guy sent me a picture the other day from a protest, and he had a big poster, and he had 2011 and then slash 2012 slash 2013 slash 2014 slash and now 2015, and he says we still want freedom, and they were out in this protest, and that's so awesome, you know, despite all of this stuff. So as long as these guys are going, we've got the partner on the ground, but we need at some point to care about their lives like we care about the lives of American journalists or Western people, and show them that we hold everybody sort of equal, and we do stand by democracy and freedom when we have people that are going out for it. And they still want it, so we should support them in that endeavor, which will destroy ISIS and the regime, hopefully.
Students, I think this is one of the reasons that you came to American University. You came here to be able to see one of your alums produce this kind of film that documents things that are happening in the world. And you came here to be able to talk firsthand and to question people who are working on issues like this. Thank you both for coming today. I wish we could have been a bit more obvious.